All right, let's get started, everybody. Thank you all for being here today. I'm Charles Werner with Drone Responders, and this is our Drone Responders webinar with Mike O'Shea's FAA and guest. And we have our distinguished guests today, Michael O'Shea, John Meehan, Carrie Fleming, and Steve Pansky, who have all been great partners throughout this journey with public safety, which we all are very thankful for. I would like to say, as we start off, just want to make sure that we remember that we never forget 9/11 and what took place on today. And the main idea here is to determine how we can be using drones to help perform responses for public safety and keep them safer in the process. So, Mike, take it away.
Welcome, everybody. And you probably all remember where you were September 11th, 2001. I was in Washington, D.C. I was actually in LaFont Plaza attending a training class in program management when, we got the word that a plane had hit the tower. We all stepped outside to watch it on TV. Everybody initially had thought it was an accident. And then the second one hit and everybody said it's not an accident. And then an airplane hit the Pentagon. And from where we were at, everybody was saying, oh my God, whatever building was between us and the Pentagon was the building that people were saying that got hit. So everybody said, it's the State Department, it's the Washington Monument, it's, everybody got hit. And then in DC, they shut down the metro. They told the feds to go home. They shut down the metro. So then there was no way for the feds to go home. And so they eventually opened the metro up. And I don't know if you know, the first stop coming from the Pentagon going eastbound is LaFont Plaza coming into Washington, D.C. And it was weird because I got on that first train. It was full of people from the Pentagon, and they were covered in dust and debris. And it was as crowded as I've ever seen a metro. It was completely packed, people standing and not caring. And I got on the train, and you just could hear a pin drop, except for people crying. It was a bizarre day. My wife was a teacher, and she always complains about parents who go home and pick up their kids after any little event. But I didn't care. I drove straight to her school where my daughter was, picked her up and took her home. I tried to see if I was going to be on the response team up to the World Trade Towers when I was still at DOJ at the time. And I was not, and I couldn't figure out why I wasn't, because I was part of our response team. And they said, well, because we were told you just had back surgery. And I was like, I had a cyst removed from my back, and somehow that got blown up to having back surgery. And so I didn't actually go on site until about 2 weeks later. Spent several weeks up in New York City, helping work at the site, helping, buying a lot of stuff on my federal credit card for both the fire department in New York and the New York Police Department and the Port Authority of New Jersey. Everything from putting cameras around the site to buying heat-resistant booties for the dogs that were sniffing in the rubble. It was a different time, and I think we forget sometimes what we do for a living, and the impact we make, and that people depend on us. And I think nothing proves that better than that day. So on better notes, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that have happened in the last few weeks for public safety in unmanned aircraft systems. One thing exciting we learned at the Baltimore Symposium was that there are several aircraft that have just graduated from the category 1 through 4, and that's the less than 0.55 pounds. Category 2 is 11 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. Category 3 is 25 pounds of foot-pound kinetic energy. And then category 4 is if you actually take an aircraft through certification. The 4 aircraft there have actually been lots of aircraft that have graduated, but they all been from one company, AgB, that have developed aircraft for agricultural purposes. But now we have some commercially available off-the-shelf aircraft that public safety can use. There's 2 DJI drone-in-the-box solutions, and then there's 2 DJI Mavics. One is the Mavic Pro Enterprise, and the other one is the Mavic Thermal. Have both graduated in a program. So if you get a chance, take a look at that. See what it takes for an aircraft you either currently own or want to buy. That'll give you the ability to do flights over people and non-sustained flights over moving vehicles. And then the cool thing coming is we have been told that there are several aircraft that are going to graduate this fall. One is from Skydio and one is from Brink. And that'll give you more available aircraft that you can buy. That gives you the opportunity, basically out of the box, to fly over people and do not conduct non-sustained flights over moving vehicles. And you're going to hear a little bit of a really exciting program that John Meehan's working at a little bit, but I don't want to steal his thunder, but it's really cool. So we'll get to that in a second. The other thing you need to know is our flight standards and our air traffic organization work together with Steve Pansky to develop a template for what we call first responder beyond visual line of sight, which everybody else in the world calls drone as a first responder. That is now on our website, that guidelines, and that is how you want to apply for this, because that's how they're going to evaluate the safety case for allowing this operation. If you can't find it, let us know. We'll send you the website, but it's essentially FAA.gov /, right? UAS, and if you go to that, it says government and public safety. You go to that, and then you hit public safety toolkit, and on that list, there's a lot of resources, and one is that first responder beyond visual line of sight template. The other thing we're working on, and I'll let Steve talk about in a few minutes here, is what we call tailored airspace, and that's working with public safety to be able to operate above the grid, whether it's 0 or if they're 100 feet and they want to operate at 200 feet or 300. And I have to give credit to Charles Warner for this. At the Baltimore Symposium, he cornered the head of the air traffic organization and said, this is something public safety really needs. And Tim Morrell said, you're absolutely right. And I don't know if you know Tim, once upon a time was a police officer and knows public safety, and agreed with Charles. And so we've started working on how we can develop this program out and provide guidance so that if you need to fly on a regular basis in 0 grid or above the grid altitudes, we can work on a way to figure that out for you. NOTAMs, we got basically worked with everybody, and we'd been working for a while with the friends from ATO that developed the guidance for our certificate of authorizations for COAs, and we'd asked for them to remove the NOTAM requirement. We asked for them to remove the monthly reporting requirement. Well, when we were at the Baltimore Symposium, we grabbed the guy responsible for that and said, hey, where are you at on this? And he goes, I removed the NOTAM requirement a year ago. And we're like, wow, nobody knew this, including the service centers who are issuing COAs. So now the service centers know this, and if you get a new COA, it should not have a NOTAM reporting requirement if you're operating under Part 91 public aircraft operations. If you want to get rid of that no requirement, you're going to have to file an addendum to your existing code to take that off. But you should know any new COA you get should not have a NOTAM reporting requirement on it. And just so you know, NOTAMs were very important when drones were first being used, around airports and other areas to notify manned aircraft that, hey, something unusual is in this airspace you need to be aware of. But we've sort of bypassed that because we have millions of operations under Part 107, which do not require NOTAM. And we have operations even under Part 91 COAs that sometimes don't require NOTAM. So the goal was to do away with this and just make sure people are aware that, there are drones out there and you need to pay attention when you're flying in the national airspace. You can still issue a COA if you need to. I know for some people, as part of their safety requirements or their insurance purposes, they require a NOTAM to be issued. And if you need to, we can still work with you to get that done. We're still working on the monthly reports. I thought we had agreement to do away with the monthly reports, but now they're trying to develop a specific report that gets data from what you guys are doing that we can actually use to build a safety case. Kind of what we talked about when we did the monthly reporting initially. So it's still trying to figure out whether it's going to happen or not. Most of you know that John, I told you John's going to talk about his program. I also want to talk to you about, we'd sent out an email probably about a month ago saying that we were looking for people who are conducting unique drone as a first responder, or what we call first responder beyond visual line of sight programs, either using what we call associated elements of safety, which is essentially technologies like cameras, radar, whatever. And we want to work with them to help develop their programs. Well, it grew out of control. They only wanted to look at a couple of them, and like 3 million people responded. So if you haven't been reached out to by somebody from Flight Standards, Uh, you're not going to be, because they didn't have the manpower to do a lot of that. However, we're still encouraging you to apply like you would normally. And we're using those cases they're working on right now to sort of develop a process and eventually guidance that'll make it a lot quicker for you to be able to submit something with unique technologies, whether it's radar, acoustic, a camera, or whatever you're going to do, or unique software solutions. So that's coming. And the last thing I want to talk about is we had an agency that reached out to us and said they had an incident with their drone. They had a stolen car that came into their city. They launched their drone to provide overwatch on the situation when the car got stopped. But also a neighboring city's helicopter also arrived over scene. And the helicopter apparently was nervous about the drone operating in the same airspace or close to the airspace they were in. And they also said they thought the drone was above 400 feet. Well, this agency didn't take that lightly. They had a really great safety culture. And what they did is they reached out to their manufacturer that works with them on drone as a first responder to see what was going on with their software, to do a diagnostic on that flight to see whether or not they did fly above 400 feet. And it turns out they did. The drone actually, when it flew over a valley, it kept going straight across the valley. So instead of dipping down to keep under 400 feet, at one point it was at 465 feet. So obviously that concerned the agency. They worked with they did a safety stand down to stop operations until they could get this fixed. Their software company reprogrammed it, made it so that it now dips and stays below 400 feet, so that won't be an issue. They also reached out to that city's helicopter unit to work with them to talk about how they operate drones, how they can deconflict the situations when they're both in the same area operating. But I want to tell you that I was amazed, because that's the kind of safety culture we would like to see public safety have. They see a problem, they don't just ignore it. They sit down, figure out what the issue is. They stop operations until they make it right. And then they bend over backwards to make sure they deconflict from other public safety operations to make sure that there's never going to be an issue. I could not be more proud of these people. They actually prepared what we call a NAS report, or an aviation safety report, to detail what they did. But I tell you, what a great safety culture. And I was overly very, very, very impressed with this agency and the safety culture that they have. And everybody here should have that safety culture. Okay, so let me turn this now over to John Meehan. And John Meehan's got a couple of PowerPoint slides, and he's going to talk about a phenomenal new program the FAA and that John worked on and got accomplished and done that's going to benefit public safety. John, it's all you.
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everybody. Hey, I've got a little presentation here I need to set up. But the first thing I want to let you know is that a lot of you have requested that we start publicizing enforcement actions against knuckleheads. And so I'm very excited to bring this to you, that in case you don't know, but on the 23rd of August, and you can find it, it's still there. I checked it today. We do have a press release on our website in the last, you can see that's a picture of it over there, but $340,000 worth of proposed civil penalties for the careless and the clueless people who are flying incorrectly or in violation and should know better. And so that's, I think, great news for the conscientious folks out there who've been pushing us very hard, and we finally got that done. So that's a big one for me. And you can go there and find it, and obviously use that when you're coaching people to fly underneath to fly in compliance. That would be great. All right. So as Mike mentioned, there are now 4 Category 2 Declaration of Compliance accepted drones out there that can be operated under Part 107, and I took a screenshot of it. These are the 4. Notice they're actually a system, a combination. They're not technically not a DJI product. Of the first 2, they're actually AVSS, the parachute recovery system people did the work on that using a DJI product there. But there's the current 4 as of today, and as Mike mentioned, we do expect more to come in the coming weeks, but that's how you go find it, UAS DOC, and then you'll filter by operations over people, OOP, and that's how you can find that. So now this kind of segues into what I'm going to talk about today is up until August, there were no Category 2 drones. There was, as Mike mentioned, one brand for Category 3, and this meant that the need for waivers to 107.39 and 107.145, operations over human beings, operations over moving vehicles with human beings, that waiver requirement really never went away. And somebody's got a hot mic, by the way. So the requirement or the need to continue to do waivers really didn't abate for us, and which was a bit of a surprise for us after we modified the rule in 2021. And I'm sure that more than a handful of you have suffered trying to get a 107.39 operations over people waiver, and you're not alone. And we looked at the data, and if you look at the history of these waiver applications, it was pretty dismal, right? Only 3% of the applications were actually getting approved. And this is very frustrating, not only for you out in the community, but it's frustrating for us because it's a waste of everyone's time when that happens. But one of the things I want to point out is that waiver applications and exemption applications really do help the FAA understand. We call it informing rulemaking, and it does help the FAA realize that, hey, maybe we need to modify the rule. And the number one waiver application was to operate at night. And then we fixed that with the amendment in 2021. And the second most requested waiver was operating over people. We thought we had fixed it in 2021, but obviously that didn't quite work out as expected, although now we're finally starting to see industry respond with some category compliant drones, which is very exciting and should be a game changer. But this also meant that the need for waivers continued really unabated, and we made some changes. We went back and looked at the hazards to operating over people, and we identified some mitigations to do that. And we also realized that this was an opportunity to greatly simplify these waiver safety explanation guidelines, which were a little daunting for mostly novice aviators out there. Most of the people who are operating drones don't have a long background in aviation, so they didn't understand the aviation speak. So that was a challenge. And we've made some changes, and I'm really happy to say that we've turned this completely around. It went from a 97% denial rate to a 44% denial rate in June when we end of June when we implemented this. And I guess I'm still really surprised because the two, we went from I think it was more than a dozen questions to two, and the two questions were describe your operation and tell us the weight of the drone with some required equipage. And 44% of the people aren't even doing that. So the waiver team tells me that the denials that we're seeing today is simply because the person didn't answer the question, which is just stunning to me. But it's a great news. It's great news because the situation has just done a complete turnaround for 107.39 and 107.145 waivers. So that's great news. These new waivers, they do allow operations over people with some equipage. And I want to kind of come back. Remember that we had talked about that there were Category 2. There's some Category 2 drones and parachute systems now. So if you use those, if you use a category compliant drone, you don't need a waiver. Okay. I want to be very clear about that. If you're using a category compliant drone, you don't need the waiver. Most people don't have that yet, so we still see a need for those waivers. The waivers, what we did is we we tried to get the what I call the 90-10 rule. How do we deal with 90% of the applications and then focus our efforts on the 10% that were different? And what we discovered was that 90% of the applications for a waiver to operate over people were with drones that weighed under 3.5 pounds. And a good chunk of them were for drones that weighed under 400 grams or 0.88 pounds. So that's where we directed our effort, was to come up with a more standardized waiver special provisions that would address the 90% of the requirement. And then that allows our waiver team to focus more on the larger drones like many of you operate, like the matrices. It gives them more time to interact with you. So that's good. But there are some equipment requirements. And you can go, if you want to see what these waivers look like, you can go to the public facing page called 107 Part 107 waivers issued, and there's a search box, a search field, and type in 107.39 and it'll filter out. And I think there's 255 of them right now. So it's a dramatic improvement. And take a look at any of those that were issued after July 1st, and you'll see they generally fall into two group. Well, there's three groups, but up to 0.88 pounds, up to and including 0.88, and then up to 3.5 and including 3.5, and then above that. But take a look at those, and that'll give you a really good idea of what's required. The big thing is you're going to need an anti-collision light, because that is one of the hazards that we've identified, because you're obviously you're even more distracted if you're operating over people. The number one injury from drones right now that we've seen is a laceration. So we require you to have some protection for that. And if it weighs more than 0.88 up to 3.5, you're going to need a parachute recovery system that conforms to the ASTM standard F3322-18 or newer. And then if you operate above the 3.5 pounds, typically those of you who have the matrices, that's still doable, very doable. But that's just going to require a more customized conversation with the analyst there. So hopefully that clarifies that a little bit. I've noticed in my conversations with folks that there seems to be a misunderstanding of what is an anti-collision light, and most of the drones out there don't have them. A few do have an anti-collision light, but I put this picture in here really to help you understand that those green and red lights that are on your drone, those are not an anti-collision light. An anti-collision light is it flashes. It's typically white or red, and we please use white or red. I'm a former helicopter pilot. Any other color doesn't trigger us like a white or red, a strobe would. And what that really helps the man pilot recognize that, hey, that's not a bird, or hey, that's something that could kill me, and they'll do something about that. Those of you who have a need for more secure kind of operations, put it on top. Where the bad guys won't see it, but the helicopter crews will. That's good. But anyway, I wanted to kind of point that out because a lot of people are confused about that. Hopefully this clears it up for you. Okay, so as Mike mentioned, I've been working very hard on what I call a near equivalent to what the public aircraft folks are getting with that tactical beyond visual line of sight or the first responder BVLOS COAs. This is a near equivalent, and we realize that a lot of public safety out there are not eligible for the statutes. You're not eligible to operate as a public aircraft because you don't meet the definition that Congress established in the code, and that's the code there if you want to look. But essentially, those of you who are volunteer organizations, volunteer fire departments, typically search and rescue organizations that are 501(c)(3)s, for example, you're not eligible for public aircraft operations. So we wanted to give you something that was what I call a near equivalent, that enabled you to go do your emergency missions beyond visual line of sight, being able to operate over people, being able to operate over moving vehicles, find a way to do that. And I think we have. And there's a screenshot of the template there, but it looks like this. It's obviously a few pages, but the other thing we did is we dramatically reduced the number of special provisions, and I feel that we've dramatically improved the wording to be more understandable than what I read in those public aircraft COAs, which I need to read very slowly when I read those. They're incomprehensible to me sometimes. So I work very hard to get this a little bit clearer and to help. Go ahead, Charles. What?
I wanted to add that you mentioned that those might not be eligible. There are some agencies that just don't want to have a desire to go to become a public aircraft operation. They still operate Part 107, which means this is equally important for them.
Great. Yeah, that's great news. And you know, why learn two sets of rules when you can only have to focus on one, right? I mean, that's
and I want to give credit to John, because I've pushed John, because John has said COAs are not the way to go. We want to make sure that you're safe. We don't want to make sure you get caught when something bad happens. And so John stepped up, and he has been working behind the scenes to move this forward. So John, thanks for your work on this.
Well, I had a lot of help. I had a lot of help, and appreciate that, though, Charles. That's nice.
And we make all this available as far as the presentation to those people that would like to have a copy of it later. And this is going to be recorded, so it will be on our YouTube channel in a couple of days.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for that. All right. So again, now this is what we call, so that for you in public safety, there's a new combination waiver that is available right now. I think this is big news for you. We call it the Public Safety Organization Shielded Ops waiver. And it's a low-tech pilot in the loop, one operator to one drone. It's lower cost than what is currently being out there pitched as a drone as a first responder, or drone in a box, or drone dock. You know, those are all great products, great solutions, but a lot of public safety entities can't afford that. And we want, this product that I'm talking about right now is for those of you who, you know, are the smaller places that may not have access to the big budgets to buy that other sophisticated stuff. So, and what it does is it waives 10731. It gives you some limited beyond visual line of sight operation capability. It allows you to do some operations over people and over moving vehicles with people inside. Does require some equipage, and we're giving you some structure on because again, when we talk to public safety, we realize that most public safety folks are novice aviators, and they don't quite understand how to look at air risk and to assess hazards in the air. So the special provisions are written to give you a little bit of structure to say, we want you to go look within a mile of where you're going to operate, identify those places where there might be helicopter operations or ag operations, or places where there might be heavy pedestrian concentrations, and to, you know, plan for that. And so that hopefully that'll be good. It allows you to go 1 statute mile out from the remote pilot and command. It's not a command center drone. It's a person out there in the field. It does rely on shielded operations, and you can go 100 feet above an obstruction, or at the minimum deployment altitude of a parachute recovery system if you have the parachute recovery system. And the highest one I've seen so far is like 165 feet, something like that. It does require ADS-B in. Hopefully you know the difference between out and in. Just realize that a lot of law enforcement and a lot of military turn their ADS-B out. They turn that off. So it's not a panacea. You still need to be vigilant, but it also does not, this particular waiver does not require a VO. The standard operations over people waiver, that 107.39, that does require a VO, for example, but this is a public safety organization one. But we still recommend it, at least one, maybe more. because you're going to be distracted, and we want somebody looking up in the sky. This is for Class G nationwide. And if many of you, well, a number of you have operations in controlled airspace, and what we recommend there is go get this operational waiver first, get that done, and then go back into DroneZone and get your airspace authorizations just like you would for a wide area authorization, that sort of thing. So hopefully that'll be good for you. It does require a mechanism, either prop guards, or a lot of the parachute recovery systems have a braking system that will stop the props from rotating. So it requires that. As I mentioned, does require the anti-collision light, and the anti-collision light is there for the manned pilot, not for you. It's there so that others can see the drone and maneuver. I'll just tell you a quick story. We've had 12 confirmed collisions between manned aircraft and drones. And in 100% of the cases, 100% of the manned pilots said that they didn't see the drone in time to maneuver. They saw it at the last second, or they never saw it at all. So we think that this anti-collision light will really help them. And remember, you're still required to get out of the way. You're still required not to interfere. But we've seen also in all those collisions, 100% of those drone pilots were looking at their screen. They were screen watching, and they were not looking up in the sky. And so that's another good reason to get that anti-collision light there. The one thing that's a little bit unusual is that because this is a infrastructure shielding kind of situation where you are BVLOS, we wanted to give these manned units that operate around you, we want to bring you two together, and that you two have the conversation as you need to. But it does, one of the special provisions does require you to notify the Flight Standards District Office that you have this. Also, we have people called mil reps. These are military representatives from Department of Defense. They're in each one of the regional service centers. So, and their job is to coordinate between the U.S. military and the FAA, and we've already prepped them to expect these. And for example, if you're down in El Paso, Texas, obviously Fort Bliss is nearby. The mil reps will get it. You'll send it to the mil reps. The mil reps will determine, hey, I'm going to send it to Fort Bliss. Oh, I might also send it over to the Air Force Base nearby, that sort of thing. They'll figure that out. We're also going to want you to send it to the manned law enforcement units and the HEMS people that operate in that area. And you might have news people that regularly operate there. And the intent here is you do it once. You don't have to do it every time you fly, but before the first time you use this, we want you to send it to them, and then they may want to have a conversation with you, like, hey, how can we deconflict? It's something Mike was talking about earlier. And maybe they want to add another 100 feet to their operation. Maybe they want to start using ADS-B more, right? So that's the intent here, again, to reduce the chances of a collision, reduce the chances of an unhappy ending, right? So that's the intent of that. All right, so I know you're all sitting there going, okay, that's great, John. Yeah, but how do I get one, right? And I put in here what it's a very loose definition of what is a public safety organization that qualifies for this. And that I copied and pasted it right out of the Public Law 118-63, which is the new FAA Reauthorization Act. It's a pretty, if you're reading it now, you can see it's a pretty loose definition, and we're fine with that. And Congress wanted us to do more for those folks, so we're going to do more for those folks. Most of you should already have an account in FAA DroneZone. If you don't have an account, then I'm hoping you're not using drones at all, because you have to register your drones, and you do it in FAA DroneZone anyway, right? So you should already have an account. You're going to go and apply for an operational waiver. You're just like you would if you're, just a civilian. You're going to complete all those steps in FAA DroneZone, but there's a couple of additional things you need to do. You need to put a letter as an attachment certifying to the FAA by the responsible person that, hey, we are a public safety organization as defined in Public Law 118-63. You're also, what we did is we created some guidelines, help you navigate through the FAA DroneZone, and there's a checklist. And we also saw that Congress said, quit doing these open-ended questions. I think Charles probably had something to do with that. I'm just saying. And the responsible person is going to basically initial that we will do this, we will do this, we will do this, we will do this, and you're going to attach that and then send it in as your normal waiver application, and then hopefully that'll blow through the system in a faster than glacial pace. And so that's the story there. I think that's all I've got. Any questions I can answer?
We do have a question that popped up. I wanted to go back here. And I think you answered it, but just to be specific, Tom Olson asked, I had to get a COA in the past for NGO performing search and rescue operations in Galveston. FAA Ops Grants Center granted waivers based on my mission. The local LEO was not available. Does this lower the qualifications to a non-LEO organization?
Yeah, so the SGI process is still available to you all. Okay, that's probably something important to bring out. This is really this is for 107 people who operate under Part 107. This is not a Part 91 COA. This is a Part 107 operational waiver. And this is really designed for anyone any public safety organization that operates under Part 107 to enable them to do their essential, urgent mission there. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, so I think a search and rescue organization would fit into that.
Yes, they do. You can see in this description right here, it's a pretty loose, if you're an entity that engages in activities related to safety and well-being of the public, I would say that meets it. Definitely. Anything else?
Let's see. Yes, that answered the question. Yes, that covered the basis. But yes, the idea here is to expand this to the agencies that are doing it that may not be eligible for public aircraft operations.
Right. And those who don't do public aircraft, those who don't operate, like you mentioned earlier, right? There's a lot of public safety entities out there who may be qualified, but they say, you know what, we're just going to keep it simple. Part 91 has a few hundred regulations. Part 107.
I guess the other thing that I noticed is this kind of takes the tactical waiver and kind of flips it a little bit to where you actually can fly further under this than you can under the current tactical beyond visual line of sight waiver.
Yeah, I think it does. But, to me, maybe this is time for true confessions. One of the things that concerns me about those of you who operate as a tactical beyond visual line of sight and first responder is that there's some very fuzzy wording in there about a life safety emergency and a extreme emergency. And we just took that out of the 107 stuff because we're like, you know what? We're not going to get into that conversation because I've been told, hey, John, every call out we get is a life safety emergency. And I'm like, no, a cat in a tree or a flat tire is not a life safety emergency. Well, with this, there's no discussion. It's like you have the ability to do that. You have to do all these other things. And that's one of the reasons why we want you to notify those low flying helicopter and ag people that, hey, maybe you want, we're going to be at 100 feet above that obstruction. Maybe you want to bump up your altitude a little bit. So that was, I'll tell you, that was one of our big goals, was to get rid of that fuzziness that I see in a lot of those COAs that really simplifies it. It takes, just takes that whole discussion off the table. And there's no, there's no pilot record database issues when you fly under Part 107, right? If you're flying as a public aircraft, one day one of your people decides to moonlight for Google, guess who's going to get hit with you're going to have to send in all their pilot records in 2 weeks. You don't have to do it until that person applies for the job, but they will list all of their aviation employers, and that will trigger a requirement for you to be able to upload all that information, and you'll have 2 weeks to do it. None of this happens under 107, none of it, because the FAA is already watching that Part 107 pilot, right? We provide the oversight for Part 107. You provide the oversight for your public aircraft operations. Just saying.
So what I'm hearing, John, is that you prefer the public safety use COAs instead of 107?
Say that again?
Can't hear you. He can't hear you.
No, here's another one that, when I was at the Commercial UAV Expo, I had a great conversation with DJI about the dock, and had a great conversation with a county sheriff's department about the DJI cart. That it's a big, heavy, and the cart is heavier than 55 pounds. And in that case, and with like these ag drones, right? If it weighs more than 55 pounds, I actually recommend people, that's when public aircraft becomes very interesting, because weight is not as much of an issue under Part 91 as it is under, there is a weight threshold, right? Your maximum weight is under 55. Once it hits 55, you bounce into Part 91 anyway. And if you operate as a civil operator under Part 91, you have to get that 44807 exemption, which is, it's a challenge. So
in comparison to the tactical beyond visual line of sight, you can go out 5,280 feet as opposed to 1,500 feet. You can go higher than a hard ceiling of 400 feet as long as you remain with 100 feet on top of a structure. You don't have to operate only for life-saving emergencies. You can operate in day-to-day operations with this. For me, it's a no-brainer. This is a really easy, I want to say easy, this is a very good process for you to operate out to a mile beyond visual line of sight. And for me, looking at the people I work on a day-to-day basis with public safety, this is a game changer. I mean, this is something that
I hope it is. I think it is. Particularly those of you doing search and rescue, right? If you're sending your drone out beyond a mile, remember these drones are operating on an unlicensed spectrum, right? So home Wi-Fi is the frequency. So if you don't want to be sending them out that far anyway, and particularly if you're in an urban environment with a lot of noise and interference. But this really was to get you that kind of that near equivalent. They're not an exact match. I think we would probably want to be clear on that. There's some things that first responder BVLOS does that might really work for you. There's some things that the tactical BVLOS one might really work for you. That's great. If it works for you, great. But all of those volunteer fire departments were boxed out before. All of those 501(c) SAR outfits were boxed out, and we knew that, hey, we got to help these folks, right? And we got to give them it's the same risk profile. It's just that the law worked for that group, but not this group. So that's kind of what we're trying to do there.
So, Mike, any chance that we might expand these responsibilities over to the PAO side with the TB loss waivers?
Wait, before you answer that though, Mike, one thing that you just reminded me, Charles. So we did get approached at the show about, hey, what about these drone dock solutions? And I want to also say, hey, yes, those are conceptually doable, okay, but that's going to require more work and more discussion. This again, I want to come back to this particular public safety organization, Shielded Ops, was really designed to, hey, let's get something out there now, a low tech solution. And the questions came at the show, hey, what about the drone dock? What about drone in a box? What about DFR? That's still, it's a possibility, but we're going to need help from the community also to propose mitigations and to help us understand that. So I just wanted to be clear on that. So sorry, Mike and Charles.
No problem. That's a good question, Charles. We would love to see the distance go from 1,500 feet out farther for tactical beyond visual line of sight. It's just something we're going to have to sit down and readdress with ATO to see if they're comfortable doing that. But for me right now, I would push people to John's new, 3-waiver program, because it's day-to-day operations. It's the tactical beyond visual line of sight is only for emergency operations. This gives you the best of all worlds, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's very straightforward. It's very easy, and it's not complicated.
Yeah, hopefully this works for you all.
And let me weigh in on just one statement here, because this always comes up, and it's a question I get on a daily basis. So what's the best program for us to be operating under as a public safety agency? Should we go under 107, or should we go get a COA? What's the best for us? And our answer is always the same: is why limit yourself to only one program? Use everything in your toolbox to be able to operate, get you the airborne the quickest, will meet your mission. That's really what you want to do. So darn it, take everything, use them all. So yeah, I would jump all over this if I were a public agency that has Part 107 operators that are holding certificates. Yes, I would definitely jump on this, is what it is.
Absolutely.
Steve, do you want to talk any about the tailored airspace?
Yeah, the only thing, Mike, I would add to what you said there is, obviously most of the audience here is probably either operating as a public or under Part 107 if you're doing this. And you all know that, when you're operating controlled airspace and there, it's a zero grid, or it's an altitude that you can't conduct your mission under, you're going to go to Kerry's folks at the SOSC and go for a special government interest approval to get and fly those missions, is what it is. And so it is recognized that for these one-off operations, it makes sense. But obviously, if there is a location in your community or a location where you're in controlled airspace and you're constantly having to go back there over and over again at the same location, you're calling Kerry's folks and asking for it on a daily basis. I know Kerry's folks are I'm sure really happy to see this happen, because they have to coordinate this over and over again, and they're looking towards, I think, the FAA to be responsive enough to say, yes, if the facilities are able to approve this on a daily basis because of the operation, maybe they can incorporate this into a COA as part of an approval that would work outside of the USFM mapping program, or under Part 107 under the LANS program. If there's a way of doing it, then you would apply for an airspace authorization under 107 to be able to do that kind of operation. So what we're working on now is to try to determine how we are best going to not just develop this, but what's the best way for you as an operator to be able to do the necessary coordination to be able to do this and get it together. And that's really what we're working on right now. And I think that's what Mike alluded to there is, yeah, there's still a little work to be done on the tail here, but we want to make sure when we bring this out that you have an easy roadmap on how you go about doing this type of coordination. So when it ultimately comes to you're either applying for a COA for these types of operations where it's in controlled airspace, that you have a methodology for how you go about doing that coordination. And there's another big piece of this is that there's a lot of air traffic managers out there in the national airspace system, and and they're not familiar with this with these programs to the extent where you're knocking on their door and maybe talking to them and what their role responsibility is and what they can and what they cannot approve or coordinate with and approve for you. So part of this is getting the message out to them to say, here is a program that we're potentially offering to public safety to give them greater access at locations where they're constantly having to go there. But we wanted to make sure that you, the air traffic manager, understand what you're able to do. And frankly, if you can approve it, yes, go ahead and do it. But if you cannot, you have to tell them, we can't approve this operation based upon the safety of the national airspace system. And so that's another piece of this component. We want to make sure we get out there to those managers that are all going to be exposed to public safety showing up at their door and talking to them about wanting to operate with greater access in the airspace they're controlling. That's all I wanted to cover.
You're basically setting a methodology in place that sets both public safety and the airports kind of in line as to how to go about doing this.
Exactly. We want to make sure that when you knock on the door, they understand what you're coming for and what they can and can't do. Conversely, we want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable about the whole thing. Yes.
Thanks, Steve. Carrie, if you could come online for a second, we have some questions for you. Yeah, could you give us an update on what's going on with the SGI approval process with the Lance service providers? And if you have any other updates on what's going on with SGIs?
Sure. So we had a call last week with about 20 of the Lance and Before You Fly app service providers. We laid out for them basic SGI, what the process is, what it applies to, what the required information is going to be. And we told them that they would have 2 weeks to decide if they wanted to be part of this process. And for all of you out there that would be utilizing one of those apps for your request. So basically, the app providers, the Lance and Before You Fly apps, will have an icon on there, a submit button, if you will. So you can actually request an SGI directly through the app. That's the only part of it that's going to become more efficient. And for a lot of first responders, especially at 3 o'clock in the morning, it is going to be much more efficient, right? Because right now, you can call in, you could get a verbal, but you still have to deal with the paperwork and filling it out and submitting it and that part. This will alleviate that part of the process. You'll be able to submit for an SGI. It'll come to us directly. Internally, we still have to put it into a COA form and coordinate and get it back to you. It's somewhat more efficient. We are going in the right direction because it's just the beginning of where automation is going to take us with the SGI process. Unfortunately, it can't be as automated as Lance because Lance was designed to be below grid altitudes around airports. And this is the part of the process for first responders where if you need to go above a grid altitude or if you need to enter restricted airspace, things of that nature, you have to go through the SGI process. So we're working with them. We're going to have the requirements. We'll get that sorted out. We expect by year's end that many of the Lance providers will be on board. You'll be able to request an SGI right through the app. We've been calling it the digital SGI process. We're also working on a process inside that is going to make our turnaround more efficient. So on the outside, Lance providers, you'll be able to go through the app. Internally, we're going to be able to turn that around even quicker as we have some automation on our end. Besides that, we're also working with the PMO group. Who are they? Well, they're the folks that send out the requirements for like the Lance providers and other folks out there when we need system efficiencies and system updates. So we have the digital SGI coming. That's going to help you. But then there's also going to be an airspace awareness portion where flight restrictions are going to start populating on all the apps if they haven't already done so. I know that was a big problem for a long time. Sometimes you'd get an alert, sometimes you wouldn't. It didn't always show that there was a flight restriction, especially new flight restrictions when there's VIP travel, which there is a lot of that going on right now. If you haven't been paying attention, after the events of Butler, Pennsylvania, we were required to start providing VIP TFRs for the Republican nominee. And it also expanded the TFRs from a 3 nautical mile radius up to 3,000 feet to 5 nautical mile radius and 5,000 feet. So it encompasses more airspace, which makes life much more difficult for everybody, especially for first responders. We have been working with Secret Service, and for the most part, unless you want to operate right where there is a motorcade passing by or the protectee is there at a particular event, we will be able to get you approvals to fly to do your missions within that airspace. But you have to talk to us. You have to come to us. No other program is going to allow you to do that. And with those app improvements in the near future, all TFRs are going to populate, including, drum roll please, sporting events. So anytime you're near a stadium, and whether you follow that sport or not, one of the biggest complaints since this NOTAM came out shortly after the events of 9/11, and again, the anniversary of that solemn day, we're finally at a point where we can have this information ingested. I personally went to the heads of security for Major League Baseball, NFL, NCAA Division I football, and NASCAR and IndyCar. And we explained to them how important it is to bring that airspace awareness for all the operators, for all the drone operators. And that will also help manned aircraft down the line because it will populate on other apps. But anyway, we went to them and said, look, drone incursions into sporting events, into concerts, things of that nature is only going to get worse. So help us, let us have that data. We're going to protect it, but we're going to have the start times, end times populate on the apps so that anybody who had a Lance approval or just for situational awareness, we're out there, you use the app. Oh, up until now, we'll tell you, oh, well, you're near a stadium, but gee, we don't know if there's an event. No, that's all going to change shortly. Hopefully within the next week or so, we're actually going to announce through social media, most likely, when that is going live. So the Lance app operators and owners will start displaying it on those apps, and that's going to help. It's also going to help you in law enforcement, because how many times have you gone and there's somebody operating a drone and you go up to them and say, hey, you're not allowed to fly here, and they show you the app and say, gee, I didn't know that. The app's telling me that I'm okay. We're taking that away from them. We're actually giving you another tool so you could just shake your head and say, yeah, nice try. That is no longer in effect. The app told you that you cannot fly here. So what's your other excuse? Outside of that, I think those are the two big issues that I wanted to bring up today. Thank you, Charles, for allowing me to be part of this. Also, Mr. O'Shea, and to the other panelists, just happy to be here and happy to help.
Hey, one more thing, Kerry, you mentioned that with the Secret Service. Can you talk a little bit about DFR, Drones of First Responder, and coordinating with the Secret Service?
Yeah, anytime you need access to that airspace, you come to us, you request an SGI, and tell us if you have a DFR program. What we're going to do is we're going to get you an SGI approval under your DFR. And rather than it to be a one-off, like a one event, the next 10 minutes, any type of special events, we will give you a TFR for the entire duration of the event. So think US Open, think Indy, the Indy 500, anywhere where there's a 99.7, but also when you have these 91, 141 VIP TFRs, we can give you an SGI approval for the duration of the event. We coordinate with Secret Service. What that will do is that if you're responding to 911 calls, you'll have your waiver. Probably will have to call the phone number in there, which will be Secret Service. Why? Because if the VIP is moving, we don't want your drone to get fried by them. Especially nowadays, they're very sensitive to anything around any of the protectees. So let's not give them a reason to fry your very expensive drone and for you to have to go back and explain, gee, I had this waiver, but I did forget to call Secret Service. We don't want that to happen. So just send us a request, let us know. where you need to operate, how long you need to operate, and if you have a DFR program.
And just to be clear, when you had a sporting event like an NCAA or an NFL game or whatever, in the past, public safety has wanted to fly perimeter areas and they couldn't. And you're saying now that you can issue SGIs to make that a much easier process.
For sporting events, there's a web portal called AAP, Airspace Access Program. You could go in there, you could, if you're affiliated with the event, if you are first responder and you're providing some type of air support for, say, the Cleveland Guardians or the Denver Broncos, and you're inside that airspace, submit a request through the Airspace Access Program, and it's aap.gov, something like that. We could get you a long-term waiver to operate in that airspace, so you won't need individual SGIs. You can get a waiver that'll cover the entire season. So we're seeing that, but also if it's a one-off, if you need to respond to an event inside that airspace, the TFR language right now says that you can operate as law enforcement as long as air traffic is aware of it and approves it. Now, that doesn't mean that you should call up local air traffic, which could be a TRACON or a center, to say, hey, I'm going to operate in this airspace. Come to the SOSC. We'll get you an SGI. We'll do the coordination so that you can do whatever you need to do in that airspace and do it legally and have that piece of paper. So God forbid that there's some type of an event, you can wave the piece of paper to your town, your city, your mayor, whatever, town council, and your insurance company, and say, no, we had a waiver. This was just an unfortunate incident. Don't want to be caught without official approval.
And last but not least, thanks, Gary. And last but not least, I want to introduce a new member of our public safety team. Jason, you want to talk a little bit about yourself, what you do in the FAA, what your relationship to public safety has been?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. First, I want to thank Charles for having me on. So I'm Jason Beim. I've been with the FAA for about 15 years in the ATO, air traffic manager of Morristown, Wilkes-Barre, Scranton, Tower, TRACON, as well as Peterborough Air Traffic Control Tower. So I'll be working with AUS 400, supporting public safety. So I'll be supporting Mike, Carrie, Steve, John, and really just working with everybody to make your lives easier, to keep advancing the mission. I'm an active firefighter, EMT. I've been active for over 20 years now. I work in a couple different locations, or I volunteer in a couple different locations, but it still excites me. I really enjoy integrating this technology into our operation, providing the answers where I can. So over the next couple of weeks, I'll be transitioning in. I'll be learning from the ropes from Mike and everyone on the panel here. So if you see my name on an email, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thanks,
Welcome.
Jason. Charles said welcome. I think I stepped on you, Charles. Sorry. I want to thank everybody for coming today and participating in this webinar. I hope you had a good summer. We took a little couple of months off, but we're going to be back until next spring. But and if you have questions or concerns, please feel free to reach out to us. We work for you, not the other way around, and our job is to provide support for your public safety operations, and we're happy to help you accomplish those. Charles, it's all you.
Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for being here again. Let's just remember 9/11, never forget the sacrifices that were made, and hopefully we can take this drone technology and move it forward such that it can help those responders out in the field to prevent them from being in harm's way whenever we can. And again, I want to thank our members of the FAA for being such great members of the team: Michael O'Shea, Kerry Fleming, Steve Pansky, John Meehan, and there's some others. And Jason, again, welcome to the team. Glad to have you, and look forward to the things we can continue to move forward. So more to work on, and thank you all until next month.